my name is Letitia. I've been here at PZC for over a year, and today for our Dharma talk today, and teacher is first, we're going to start off with Vila Senor Diego over here. Diego started practicing with Kuntz, K-U-S-Z, in 2011 down in the Orlando Zen Center. He lived in the Orlando Zen Center for 5 years where he became a Dharma teacher. In 2022, he moved up to the Providence Zen Center and became a senior Dharma teacher. He now lives in Providence and works as a data analyst. Okay, our teacher that's asking questions today, that are answering questions today is Terry Cronin, JDPSN. Started practicing Zen and Christian contemplation in 1980 while a student at Yale Divinity School. Since 1986, he has trained in the Kwan School of Zen. He received inka from Zen Master Soeng Hyang in April 2014 and is guiding teacher of the Northern Light Zen Center in Topsham, Maine. For over 20 years, he has worked in a variety of roles for hospice programs, currently serving as a hospice chaplain. He lives in Maine and has one adult son. Thank you all for being here, and thank you all for appearing. All right, thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming out on this very, very, very cold day. I'm always so happy to see our Dharma room so full. So, a couple months ago, there was something going around in my particular sphere of social media, the kind of Catholic Christian kind of social media and kind of camp that I'm still partially a part of. And it was kind of a bit like the ice bucket challenge, if you guys remember that from a couple years ago, where people would do different challenges and be like, ah ha ha ha. I don't know how widespread this was, but there was this kind of challenge going around on, can you explain the Trinity of God without committing blasphemy? And for those who are unfamiliar, in Catholicism, the Trinity is an expression of God as the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. And there were all sorts of just kind of crazy things about people trying to explain this. And kind of my favorite one came when this guy was like, the Trinity is like Neapolitan ice cream. And I just sat there and I thought, oh boy, we're really going to stretch this analogy, aren't we? And he went on to say, well, you know, in Neapolitan ice cream, it's all ice cream. None of it is more ice cream than the other. But, you know, chocolate is never vanilla, and vanilla is never strawberry, and strawberry is never chocolate. But you need all three of it, otherwise it wouldn't be Neapolitan. And I'm like, okay, yeah, I like ice cream. But I enjoyed this video because it became the basis for a commentary, and I forget the name of the father, but one of the Catholic priests. And he came in to say, you know, the thing about it is that's not incorrect, but it doesn't quite get at it. In fact, you know, any kind of explanation of the Trinity is always going to be insufficient at the end of the day, because the entire point of God is that it needs to be something greater than what our intellectual mind is able to put into a category or understand. Because if it wasn't, it wouldn't be God. It would just be our minds at the end of the day. One of the fundamental points of the Trinity is that it pushes us into a relationship of something that doesn't fit into just the way we intellectually understand or relate to the world, and it has to be bigger than that, to kind of put us in this relationship of awe and not knowing and wonder at what lies before us. And I heard that and I thought, wow, that's really quite exceptionally clear. That really resonates with me. Now, I won't commit the blasphemy of saying all religions are the same and be overly reductive and say what they're practicing with is the same thing that we're practicing with. But that point is so fundamental, because that's the same point that we use here as the root of our practice and everything that we're doing. We're here to practice and relate and root ourselves in something that isn't just based on our intellectual understanding. It isn't based on how can we categorize it and form a logical argument and analogy way of explaining it. It's based on just this complete, total, direct experience with this moment just as it is. But even those words don't do it justice, because it's not based on our thinking. It's something bigger and kind of greater than that. And this really is the root of everything that we do here. I draw some attention to that because I've been reading through a lot of books from different kind of wisdom and spiritual traditions these days. And it's kind of helped me orient myself to my practice here a little bit quite as well. And in one of these, an author, John Greer, I believe his name was John Greer, spoke in his introduction, his translator's introduction, that the point of this text is your job as a reader of this text is to understand it on 3 levels. 1 is the literal interpretation of what's being written. 2 is the intellectual understanding of what's being written. And 3rd and most important is the spiritual understanding of what's being written. What is the meaning behind these words that are being expressed? That's really important, because what we're doing in our practice is we're having an experience and a connection with something that's not based on our intellectual thinking or our mind. In fact, most wisdom traditions do that. And yet, many are put into the awkward position of then having to try and give voice to it, to try and put it into words. And maybe they will use very, very, very heavy-handed, complex symbolism and analogies to try and express something that's fundamentally not very expressible. Or they'll use a variety of methods, but the point being is that behind all of the words, there's that rooting point that gives life to it. And that's exactly how our practice functions as well. And without that root, it's so easy to get lost in all of the different teaching pieces and forms and words that are thrown out there. Because all the words are just an expression of some fundamental root of don't know. Take, for example, this teaching word we use a lot. Just believe in yourself 100%. That's true. And that's reflecting a very fundamental point of this not knowing mind and way of relating that we all have. But if we're not rooted in that, someone might hear that and go, oh, well, I've got all these ideas, believe in them 100%. There's a lot of Americans who really need to maybe not believe in themselves 100%. Maybe a little bit of self-doubt would be healthy for some of that intellectual stuff. Or even something like, there's nothing to attain. You don't get anything from practice. That's also true on a very fundamental level. But if we don't root ourselves in the before thinking experience of it, then it's kind of easy to become like a dead rock in your practice. You're just sort of sitting there, you show up, you don't really kind of pay attention to the moment, your mind's going that way, okay, come back that way, go home, form some opinions, and kind of leave it at that. There's something very interesting that happens when you really rest in this moment and really let it kind of digest everything that's going on in our mind. I guess this is just a very long way of me trying to say that in my 15 or 16 years of doing this, I have found that there is nothing that is arbitrary about our practice, about our forms, or about the teaching words that we use. There's nothing arbitrary that we do here. Zen Master Soeng Hyang used to say, you could chant Coca-Cola, Coca-Cola over and over and over, and as long as you're doing it with the same focus of mind, that's very similar, that's the same thing. And that's also true. So why haven't we replaced all of our chants with Coca-Cola, Coca-Cola, Coca-Cola? One is we haven't received a sponsorship deal. And two is because maybe there's something that's operating on that level that kind of defies our intellectual understanding in the chants and the practice forms that we use. Maybe there's something that's happening when we invoke the symbolic name of compassion and wisdom over and over to ourselves and use it to kind of process some of our emotion and our grief and our hope. Maybe there's something happening there on a level that isn't purely intellectual. The same thing is true of our kongans. I won't speak too much about them, but none of the kongans are arbitrary either that we use in our 10 gates. And some people think that once you pass the kongan, that's it. You've passed the kongan, you're gone, you're done, you move on to the next one. But in my experience, passing the kongan is really just the beginning of working with it. Then there's this long process of digesting, well, what does this wisdom mean for my everyday life? And how do I use it to really function? The one that's been coming up more and more for me these days is Bodhidharma's beard. And it's a very simple kangan. It just goes, why does Bodhidharma have no beard? Now, if you look at any picture of Bodhidharma, his defining characteristic is this really, really long beard and very grumpy look in his eyes. He's got this weird situation where, his defining characteristic is beard, but I'm being asked, why does he have no beard? How many people today, when you look out into the world, are trying to sell you a bald-faced lie? Are trying to tell you, don't believe what you see in front of you, don't believe your eyes, let me try and throw you off. So the Bodhidharma Kangan, invites a certain wisdom on how we relate and how we can kind of work with this situation that we face in the world every single day. And I wish I could sit here and tell you what is the hidden meaning and what is the hidden work behind all of the practice forms. What does it really do when you give yourself to it? But I can't. And it's not that I don't want to. I'm certain if Terry could open his mouth and with the right sequence of words invoke an experience in you that wakes you up to everything right in front of you, he would do so. Probably. Same for Kwan Hang, same for really anyone. If there was some sequence of words that we could use to bring it to life for you, we would have already used it. But the fact is that we can't. Because it only has meaning and usefulness to you if it's arrived at and understood by yourself from your own experience of working with it and paying attention to it and rooting yourself in don't know and giving life to it. All of this is to kind of say as I wind things down is I want to give special emphasis to everything that we do in our practice. Because when we really root ourselves in don't know, and when we can kind of have some trust and faith that there's nothing arbitrary about anything that we're doing, all of it serves a very useful point in our practice. On the one hand, it's to hold the mirror to your mind so that you can see your likes and dislikes and learn how to function in the moment. But maybe some other stuff that happens as well. And when you approach it from that perspective, everything in the practice opens up to you. Oh, what does this chanting do for me? How does it work on me and how do I work on it? Let me go do it and I'll find out. Or, I don't really like kongans, but if they're not arbitrary and if something might function with me or digest with me from doing them over and over, what would that be like? Let me go and do them. And that's the root of our practice, not just in the forms, but letting ourselves open up with that big curiosity and that big mind that isn't just trying to intellectually understand it, but really let it go. How does this function and relate to me, and how do I use this to relate and function with other people moment to moment to moment? And like I said, I wish I could tell all of you, but the big secret is that we can't, because it can only be arrived at from yourself. So please practice sincerely, find something that works from you, support your friends, neighbors, your sangha, and don't be disappointed if your team loses the Super Bowl today. Thank you all for your practice.
Thank you, Diego.
Thank you, Terry.
Thank you, Diego, for your very clear and evocative talk. So, just so I have a sense, raise your hand if you're here today for the first time. One. Thank you for being here. Welcome. So, just a couple of hands were raised, and so most of you then are familiar. This after the talk, we just open it to questions, and so that's what we'll do. Any questions that you have?
Okay, then I have a question. This is something that came up to me, Diego, what you were talking about during chanting. Just on this Kyelche, I had this sensation that we were doing Kwan Bosao, right? That I was becoming, like it was actualization. I was becoming Kwan Bosao. Rather than praying to a deity to help others, like we become, we are the only ones that can do it, really. So I wonder about that, like all of this stuff, it can have this religious context to it, and we have cards on the altar for Kwan Bosao. We're trying to help these suffering beings, but really it's us, right? Do you have that sense that it's pointing back to us, this practice that we're doing?
I think you just let the cat out of the bag.
Yeah, what you're saying, Juan Yilsanim, and what Diego said come together in that it's all about our doing it. In Juan Yilsanim's example, I used doing chanting, and had then the experience that he described, just shared with us just now. Would not have happened if he wasn't doing it. So it's not, as Diego was saying, it's not about our intellectually studying about it. It's about our engaging fully in each moment, moment by moment by moment. Towards the end of his talk, Diego used the word practice. And in my teaching, I emphasize practice. I frequently will talk about practice in the narrow sense of the word and practice in the broad sense of the word. Often people hear the word practice and they think of it in the narrow sense of the word. In this tradition, our sitting meditation, bowing meditation, chanting meditation, walking meditation are those four key practice forms. But I teach almost exclusively lay people. They're not living in a monastic setting. Most of them are still a lot younger than me and out and about, working full time. And so they're not spending hours and hours and hours every day in sitting meditation or chanting meditation. Hopefully they're doing some of that, but they're not spending 10, 12 hours a day doing that. So I emphasize practice in the broad sense of it. What are you doing right now? What is your body actually doing in this moment? That's where it starts. You're being aware of what is my body doing in this moment? And then do it 100%. And when you become aware that you're on autopilot, that your body is doing what your body's doing in that moment, but that you're not paying any attention to the doing of it, you're lost in imagining the future or remembering the past or discursively thinking about stuff that probably has nothing to do with what you're actually doing in that moment. When you become aware of that, bring your attention back and resume doing what your body is actually doing. That coming back over and over again, whenever we become aware that we're on autopilot, we bring our attention back. That's our practice. And I speak of it that way because it maps over then to every situation. There's nothing different about sitting meditation practice compared to talking with your best friend practice, compared to putting a catheter into someone practice. If that's what you're doing at that moment, when you're doing sitting meditation, what your body is doing at that moment is sitting still, using whatever posture you're sitting in, looking at the floor, breathing, using whatever meditation method that you're using. And when you become aware that your body's doing that, but you're not paying attention at all, you're lost in space somewhere, then come back. So practice in the broad sense of the word, practice in the narrow sense of the word, all the same practice. Just if we get too attached to the narrow sense of the word, we can start to believe that we're only practicing when we're doing sitting or bowing or chanting. And we lose sight of the moment to moment to moment practice that for most lay people comprise, that's the vast bulk of their day. And so putting our emphasis on making every moment of our day practice. And so some moments of chanting might have that experience of feeling, I am Kwan Bosal. Not chanting to something out there, but realizing that we, each one of us, are Kwan Bosal, the embodiment of compassion. Can we do that moment by moment by moment? At a moment when you're chanting, When you're cleaning a dirty diaper, clean the dirty diaper. That's practicing compassion in that moment. Other questions? Yeah.
So I noticed that. Oh. Sorry, were you doing the microphone? Okay.
I can't hear you.
Okay. Hi. So I noticed that sometimes it's hard to bring awareness when I'm really concentrating on a task. For example, if I'm doing something that requires a lot of thinking, like a really difficult math problem, I feel my mind just kind of get absorbed in that. And it's only when I step back and stop thinking so hard that I'm able to kind of bring that awareness and presence back. And so I'm wondering, are there limits to the awareness that we're able to have, or is that kind of a capacity that we can grow over time through meditation and similar practices?
Yeah. Just doing it. And we can be careful not, there's a word we use in this tradition called checking. It's kind of a self-conscious of, like in your example, am I concentrated enough right now? Am I paying enough attention? And we can get kind of caught up in measuring in that way. Can it be more than this? And there's ways in which try to let go of that kind of self-reflective checking and kind of just do it. When you're doing that math problem, like you said, you're just doing it. And almost until you stopped doing it, stood back from it a little bit, that you might have been aware of how concentrated you were. But when you were doing it, you were just doing it. And I'm glad you used that example, because it's an example involving a type of thinking. And sometimes in the words of Zen, it sounds sometimes on the surface like thinking is a bad thing. But, thinking is an amazing capacity that we've evolved as the human being. Our challenge is it's such a powerful capacity that all of us become very attached to it. And we unconsciously, we come to believe that thinking is everything, or that we should always be thinking. We stop seeing it as an incredible ability to employ when it's called for, and to let it go when the moment doesn't call for it. You're fully engaged working that math problem is involving a kind of thinking. I hope you are, if that's your task at that moment to solve that math problem, then engaging that kind of thinking is necessary. But if you're, in conversation with your best friend, then at that moment, thinking about the math problem is then kind of pulling you away from what's the actual moment at hand in that moment. Sometimes I'll use a metaphor for I live in Maine, and there's a lot of people garden in Maine. And so if you're going to garden, having a variety of gardening tools is really helpful. One of those tools is a rake. But if you only ever pick up the rake and use the rake, there are moments when the rake is really not the most helpful tool to be using. When the moment calls for a rake, it is the best tool to be using. But if the moment is calling for using a spade, then the rake isn't going to be as helpful to you. So recognizing the wide range of tools that we have and using each of them in the moments when that tool is skillful. In this tradition, we speak of skillful means. And again, too frequently people they think skillful means are only bowing, sitting, chanting, walking. But there's countless skillful means. Which are the ones most appropriate to the moment you're in? You know, if you decide you want to run a marathon, then the skillful means of running is, the best tool to employ to build up your endurance, to build up your muscle, to become proficient enough to run a marathon. You could do sitting meditation till the cows come home. It's not going to be, if your purpose is to run a marathon, doing more and more and more sitting meditation is not going to prepare you to run a marathon as well as running. I'm not saying it has no benefit at all for that purpose, but it's not the most skillful means to employ as your training for that task. Other question?
I have a question about spirituality and Zen. So Diego mentioned spirituality in his talk. I was raised without religion, and I remain without religion. So and sometimes, teachers will use the word spirituality to refer to Zen, and that always kind of sticks in my craw a little bit. And I think, I was just thinking, why that is, and I think because in kind of the traditional sense, we talk about okay, you have your body, you have your spirit or soul, and then sometimes, we talk about, okay, and then we have our mind. That's like three separate things. So what does spirituality mean in Zen? Do we have this separate spirit that's above and beyond our normal experience?
That's a wonderful question. And a perfect example of how when we open our mouths, one of the teachers in our school wrote a book, Open Mouth Already Mistake. Any words that we use, we kind of live under the illusion that we're kind of using the words univocally. We're all using them the same way. And there's a perfect example of how, depending on how somebody's using that word, it may be helpful to the listeners, or it may create problems for the listeners. That word spirituality, depending on if someone means by that, we have a spirit that's different than our soul, that's different than our mind, then someone else that might think, that's crazy. How do you carve up the being like that? And so it's not necessary to use that word. If you're someone that feels that that word isn't helpful to me, just you don't feel that because you heard it in this setting that you have to use it or employ it. For 28 or so years, I worked in hospice care. As I was listening to the introduction and the mini biography that they have on file for me is a bit outdated. I've been retired for the last 4 years or so, and had worked in hospice care for 28 years at the time of my retirement. And I mostly worked as a hospice chaplain. And one of the biggest challenges that we faced all the time, good hospice care is offering the patient and families a wide range of support services, nursing, CNAs, bereavement counselors, chaplains, social workers, this wide range of support being offered. And working as a chaplain, the biggest challenge was the vast majority of people, when they would be told, there's a chaplain on the team, would you like to have a chaplain visit? Most people hear that as a religious function. And for so many people, they feel like, don't send that person through my door. I don't want somebody here preaching at me. And so the challenge faced is how to very quickly explain to someone that a chaplain isn't what they're imagining it to be, likely, that it isn't going to be forcing religion upon them. It's more so focused on how to help someone really kind of reflecting on what gives meaning and purpose in their life. So often the word spirituality is used similarly to talk about what is it that gives your life meaning and purpose and value. And everyone answers that as they answer it. But using it that way, someone might feel, oh, okay, using it like that makes some sense. So yeah, all the different words that we can play with, how can we play with them without being too attached to them? Other questions? What time frame do we go to?
11:30.
Thank you. Other questions?
Good morning. Can we go back a little bit? So the first question about the math problem and how to stay present, right? So I've been meditating for a little while, and and I'm still working. So I find myself in situations occasionally in which I have to be there, but it really is a pointless exercise. So should I stay present? Because I really find it very difficult too. What is your advice about this?
That's a wonderful question. The way I teach around that is, at that moment, be very clear what you're feeling, thinking, experiencing, and make your choice and be clear of your choice and then do it. And in that moment, if you're in a moment and you're experiencing it as kind of a waste of your time, depending on the situation, if you have the option of leaving, saying this is a waste of my time, I'm gonna go do something else, then, but often, many times, we don't have that option. And so being clear about what your experience is and what you're choosing to do, so you're kind of owning your life and making a conscious choice. This is a waste of my time. I'm going to kind of check out and do something else with my, I'm assuming if you can't physically leave, then you're going to be shifting to what you're thinking about or how you're somehow spending that time in a way that feels more meaningful to you. I think one of the challenges for all of us in those kinds of moments is how accurate is our experience of this is a waste of time, and I'm saying this as a question, not as a statement, but to be asking ourselves in that moment, okay, is this kind of I, my, me mind that's appearing? I want it to be different than it is. I want it to feel different than it feels right now. I want it to be something different. So much of this practice is our really training ourselves to be with reality just as it is in that moment, without being trapped in our kind of knee-jerk reactions of, oh, I don't like this, so I push it away, or, oh, I love this, so I try to hold on to it. That like-dislike mind that is so powerful. And so our trying to be as clear as we can about all of what's happening in that moment to make then good decisions about when it is smart for us to put our mental energy into something else, that this moment is a waste of my time. And when being challenged to stay with it and see what appears, see what else unfolds, see if that experience of, oh, this is a waste of time, see if that changes. Like everything in our practice, there's no cookbook formulas, oh, always do this. And that brings it back again to each of us, can we own our own life? What choices am I making in the moment? And own my choices.
Terry, I have a question. I have a question up here.
Oh, hi, Edith.
Thank you for your teaching. You started to go there and then you kind of dropped it. In a situation like that, it's also very helpful to remember that it's not for me. It's how about this whole situation? In this particular situation, maybe some of the other people need to have this meeting. So that
Thank you for teaching me. Yeah, you know, that's absolutely a core part of our way. You know, compassion for others. You know, why? For you. And so, you know, making that part of our awareness of the moment of, is there, you know, how can I help in this situation? I may not be feeling very excited about it, or it may feel like a waste of my time, but is it possible for me to help? How can I help? Looking clearly for that. Other question? Thank you all so much. Diego, thank you for your talk. Thank you all for being here, for your questions and your practice. I hope you'll come back again.
Great, thanks everyone for coming. Just a few announcements before we end. First of all, we'll be, in a few minutes we'll be doing a Pointing at the Moon interview in here, which is our interview series with teachers. And we need a couple of volunteers to help Chris bring in the equipment. No, we don't. Oh, we're good. Okay, never mind. Well, if you do want to do something else though, but you only have a few minutes, we do need that holiday tree to come down. And there's a box in the closet out there. But you want to finish before they start the interview, obviously. Let's see. We have a number of upcoming retreats. We have another one-day retreat on February 22nd. That's in a couple of weeks. And we have our Two Traditions, One Family retreat on March 14th. That's actually a really interesting retreat where we have people come down from a Soto Zen tradition, and we kind of alternate between the two practices. And I believe we might actually get interviews from both this time, which would be really fun. So that's March 14th. Of course, Kilche is still happening up at the monastery. It's a 1 week minimum. You do need previous experience practicing in our school, since it is a relatively, I'm not allowed to use the word intensive because we have an intensive week, which is coming up in a couple weeks, but I think it is it is strong practice. What else? We usually have our Wednesday night. Oh wait, we have the keto. Is Gary here? Yeah, Gary's here. We're going to have a, wait, no, we can't. So we're going to have the interview in here. How many people want to stay for the keto? It's 12, it's only an hour. Do we have?
I would say I think the keto is more important than an interview as just a practice thing.
Well, do we have, was anyone planning to stay for the keto? Okay. Well,
kind of explain what the keto is?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Gary.
As part of our practice here, in addition to just sitting meditation and walking meditation, we also have a number of other meditation techniques. One of them is bowing meditation, but another one is chanting meditation. If you've ever come here on Wednesday night, you probably know what the chanting meditation is, but if you only come here on Sunday, or if it's your first time, we're going to have a chanting session after this, starts at 12, where we chant a number of Buddhist chants, Kwan and Thousand Eyes and Hands, Great Dharma, that type of thing. It's going to last about an hour, You don't have to stay for the whole thing. If you're just curious, you can just stick your head in the door. If you want to participate, you can, stay as long as you want. As part of the chanting, we're also going to have a box of instruments, various instruments, tambourines and motaks and wood sticks and stuff like that. So in addition to just chanting, we're going to make a lot of noise. And we're going to do that sitting down. We'll do it standing up. We'll walk around the room. We'll do a lot of different things like that. And I don't know if you've ever chanted before, but it's a really, really good way of being present in the moment. It's hard to drift when you hear, a bunch of other people banging on drums and chanting. So you're more than welcome to stay. And again, it'll start at 12. You don't have to stay for the whole thing. If you want to stay for just a few minutes of it, that would be appreciated. I don't think
Gary, how about doing that in the upstairs Dharma room?
We could do that in the upstairs Dharma room, yeah.
Okay, so at 12 o'clock, anyone who wants to chat, follow Gary to the upstairs Dharma room, and we'll still do a group recording in here. The gift shop will be open. I did notice we have a group, looks like they're meditating in the interview room, so don't be too loud. Feel free to still converse, of course.
And as Danielle mentioned, there's pizza out there, but I assume the pizza has, if anyone's participating in any of the activities today, namely the chanting or the interviews or whatever, I would assume they have precedence on the pizza.
Yes, but if there's leftovers, you're welcome to them. All right, so I'll just end here. Thanks for bearing with us. Thank you very much.
One quick request, at 1 o'clock, if one or two people have maybe 20 minutes extra to help, I'm going to replace the light in that bulb up there, so I need help with the ladder, and I also need somebody to catch me if I fall.
If anybody would like to help, any of the dark cushions can go back.